Lee, now commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, saw an opening, a bold chance to carry the war northward, to take the fight across the Potomac, to strike the Union on its own soil and prove that the South was not merely defending, but destined to prevail. If they could invade Maryland, perhaps even threaten Washington, European recognition might follow. Perhaps the North, weary of blood, would seek peace. So, under the blistering September sun, Lee's army began to move. They were lean, proud, and barefoot. Many carried rifles older than themselves. Some marched in tattered uniforms held together with twine, yet their eyes burned with belief, the unshakable faith that one decisive strike could end the war. The men crossed into Maryland singing, "Maryland, my Maryland," a song banned in the North but sacred in the South. Civilians watched them pass, some cheering, others hiding behind shutters. To Lee, Maryland was still a slave state, still brother to Virginia. He expected its people to rise and join the cause. But the cheers never came. The invasion stumbled from its first step. The men were hungry, exhausted, and ill. Many collapsed along the road. Stragglers fell behind until entire brigades were lost to fatigue and disease. Still, Lee pressed on. His mind was fixed on a grand strategy: to divide his forces, capture Harper's Ferry, and then reunite them for a sweeping blow against McClellan's army. It was a bold plan, brilliant, and fragile. On September 13, 1862, in a field near Frederick, Maryland, a Union soldier named Barton Mitchell found something strange: 3 cigars wrapped in paper, lying in the grass. The paper turned out to be Special Order 191. And now Lee, emboldened by victory, had crossed the Potomac River into Union territory, the first major Confederate invasion of the North. His goal was clear: force the Union to negotiate, win Maryland's support, convince Europe, especially Britain and France, that the Confederacy was a viable nation, strike a blow on Northern soil that could shift the entire direction of the war. But armies are not abstractions. They are human bodies experiencing cold, heat, hunger, fear, and exhaustion. And by the second week of September 1862, Lee's army was in rough shape. The campaign had been daring, perhaps too daring. Units were scattered across miles of territory. Shoes were scarce. Rations were inconsistent. And the movements of his divided forces depended on coordination. A risky gamble for any commander operating so deep in enemy land. Lee understood the danger. He issued written orders to ensure that every part of his army knew their position, their timing, their objective. These orders, labeled Special Order 191, explained exactly where each Confederate division would march, where they would converge, and how they would support one another. It was, by any measure, the most sensitive piece of military information in the United States of America on that morning, and by noon, it was lying in the grass of a farmer's field, lost, forgotten, wrapped around 3 cigars. By September 1862, McClellan was again in command, tasked with stopping Lee's Maryland campaign. The stakes were immense. If the Confederacy achieved success on Northern soil, Lincoln's political standing would suffer. Foreign powers might intervene. And the momentum of the war, already uncertain, could tilt permanently toward Richmond. The Army of the Potomac marched through Maryland with a mixture of caution and urgency, uncertain where Lee's divided army actually was. Scouts reported Confederate movements near Frederick, near Hagerstown, near South Mountain, but nothing clear enough to form a decisive plan. War is often fought in fog, but sometimes the fog breaks. On the morning of September 13th, soldiers of the 27th Indiana Infantry rested on the outskirts of Frederick. They had been ordered to sweep the field around a recently abandoned Confederate campsite. The grass was flattened where soldiers had slept. Ash piles marked where fires had burned low. A lone shoe lay half buried in the mud. These were the ordinary remnants of an army on the move. Then Sergeant John Bloss noticed something strange. Near a cluster of weeds lying in the short grass was a small envelope wrapped around 3 cigars. The paper stained slightly brown where the tobacco pressed against it. The cigars themselves were unremarkable, common among officers. But the paper bore a heading: Headquarters, Army of Northern Virginia, Special Order, Number 191. The sergeant turned it over, reading quickly at first, then again in disbelief. This was no ordinary scrap. It listed the precise movements of Lee's army, which corps were heading where, which units were detached, even which bridges they intended to cross. On the late morning of September 13, 1862, the men of the 27th Indiana Infantry halted in a field east of the National Road near Frederick, Maryland. They stacked their rifles, broke ranks, and moved into the grass to rest on ground that Confederate troops had used as a campground only a day or two before. In that tall grass, Corporal Barton W. Mitchell noticed an envelope with 3 cigars wrapped in a sheet of paper. Tobacco was scarce, and any soldier would notice 3 cigars lying in the open. When Mitchell unwrapped them and saw that the paper carried the heading of the Army of Northern Virginia and an address to Major General D.H. Hill, he understood that he was holding something more than scrap. He took it to First Sergeant John M. Bloss. Bloss in turn brought it to their regimental commander, Colonel Silas Colgrove. Within a short time, the document was moving up the Union chain of command toward the headquarters of Major General George B. McClellan.